In the interest of time, I'm going to hand over to Clint Harker, Chairman of the FIA Protea branch. Over to you, Clint. Thank you.
Thanks. Good morning, guys. That you sort of know it. It says here, Adele began her career in banking industry in 2006. She then moved to Telkom SA. She was awarded the Telkom Woman of the Year in Honesty and Integrity. She joined Envirosure in 2008, worked her way through the ranks, and was appointed in 2012 as the Portfolio Manager of Western Cape. Adele in 2002 was then appointed as Operations Manager, a General Manager in 2018, and in 2025, Adele was appointed as a Director of Envirosure. So we're very excited to welcome Adele. We chose this topic for a specific reason. As you know, I'm also a broker, and often I'll see clients, and clients aren't aware of the liabilities and around environmental liability. So that's the reason we chose this. Just some housekeeping in that is that the ECPD points awarded for the session. Envirosure will be issuing the certificates, so it may take a couple of days, maybe a week to get those. So just wait patiently, you will get that. You must stay to get the CPD points. You've got to stay on the session for the full session. There are spot prizes during the session, 2 take-a-lot vouchers, which Envirosure have generously sponsored. So you've got to pay attention, listen, and you could be winning one of those 2 vouchers. So I'm just going to Adele, and Adele, it's all yours.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you to the FIA for hosting us today. We are very glad to be presenting to you. So we do encourage you to make the session interactive. I've got Jade MG, our operations manager, here with me. So she's going to handle the chats for us. So any questions as you go along, feel free to pop them in there. She'll put an answer and then she'll raise it to me if she thinks it's something that we should discuss for the group. So please feel free to make it as interactive as you want. If that does make you feel a little bit uncomfortable and you're shy, we'll put our details in the chat as well. So you're welcome to contact us privately and we will gladly share any further information with you. So thank you so much. Okay, so we're going to stay on the screen for a little bit of time. So don't feel like we've lost you or left you behind. So these are just some of the really important aspects when it comes to environmental claims. So as Clint had mentioned, it's not something that everybody thinks about, but it's really pertinent. And there's a lot of different aspects that go into it that make it quite complex and unique, which then obviously has a direct correlation to the impact into the environment and also the potential cost exposures. So with this, starting at claims management. So when it comes to environmental claims, claims management is absolutely critical. This is really the most pivotal aspect when it comes to environmental claims management. So every claim is unique. There's no cookie cutter answer, it's non-standard. There's a lot of different variable aspects that come into play when you're dealing with an environmental claim. So you have to be very amenable, you have to move and adjust quite quickly because things are always changing and every claim is unique. So this is where Envirosure is quite fortunate that we are one of the very limited places where our claims are actually exciting and they're fun, and it's always something to learn. So with this, on the claims management side, if you can see in the image here, we've got a tanker that's overturned. There's a bit of impact onto the embankment, onto the road surface. But what you don't see in the image is that it's at a downward gradient, the flow path. The product's gone into the drain system. Just behind the bridge that's in the back of the image, the product is falling into a river. So in terms of the management of the claim, it's not as simple as we're going to go and basically clean up the tanker. In this case here, you also have to immediately look at what is the overall potential impacts. Our first measure of containment is going to be to boom that river. So multiple layers of boom containment onto the river to stop the further spread of the product, and then having teams dealing with the actual tanker itself. you're still going to have potentially product in the tanker. Fuel tankers are compartmentalized, so you don't often lose the entire tanker when there's an incident. So you're going to have separate teams doing a product transfer to mitigate a loss. You're going to have teams dealing with the impacts into the embankment, the road surfaces. So you've got a lot of different coordination happening simultaneously to ensure that we effectively manage and mitigate risks to the environment and human health with a direct correlation to the cost of the claim. So it is always a unique experience, and you're going to draw from your background knowledge as to how you're going to deal with the claim, but every single one is going to be unique. And the most critical aspect of that is the speed of response. Obviously, the quicker you can get to a spill, the quicker you can contain it to stop it spreading further into the environment, water sources, etc. That reduces the exposures and the costs. But what is really pertinent to note with that is that it is speed of response of the best and most suited response team. So it may not always be the guy that can get there quickest or the bucky. It is the team that has got the correct skills, staff, equipment, and knowledge to handle the claim correctly. There's that conception that if you get the first people there, that they can handle a spill. So they may potentially be able to assist with some of the containment, but they are not going to have the equipment and expertise to deal with a large scale spill like this, or even the potential access to information to have an environmental desktop assessment done so that we can already know before we even get to site, where are the water sources, where are the tributaries leading, what type of soil are we dealing with, what is the sort of topography of the underlying area, the water tables. There's a lot of different information that is utilized to ensure that we're sort of basically handling the response correctly. So speed of response is important, but it has to be the correct response team. We then have got various different external factors. So from a brokerage perspective, you may have, or you definitely encountered clients saying that they don't have a risk exposure. They've been operating in the space for many years. They've never had a claim. It's not going to happen to them. They run a really tight ship. There's no exposure. And if it does happen, quick fix, they can handle it. So there's often things that happen that are broad of anyone's control. And that's ultimately why we have insurance, to basically come in the event of an emergency and handle it and assist. So although the client can be operating fantastically, you cannot control, for example, a third-party vehicle causing an incident. You can't always control the road conditions. You can't control a medical emergency of the driver. Even on a site-based risks, there's many variables broad of the operational controls that could lead to an incident happening. And essentially, we just need to ensure that there's correct cover in place in the eventuality that something does go wrong, albeit not the client's fault, and they could have put loads of different mitigation measures in place. This is why we have insurance ultimately. So with some of these external factors outside of an incident occurring, so we've now had an incident occurred out of everyone's control, where the incident happens does also have a major implication on the cost and the methodology used. So if this claim in the image, for example, was 200 meters down the road, it would be a completely different claim scenario. The road would have leveled out, the stormwater drains wouldn't have been leading into that river. It would have been significantly less complicated and the cost would have been significantly less. The weather has a major impact in terms of how we respond to claims. So outside of just spreading the product on site, so if we do have, say, massive rainfall, in some instances, it can be detrimental to the claim. If it's a non-soluble product, your area of contamination now spreads significantly. The potential saturation of the product into soil and water sources grows significantly. In other cases, rain can be a solution. So it's a little bit of a saying that we have here that dilution is the solution to pollution if it's a soluble product and it's sort of safe in that environment. Some instances, the rain can help, others it can hinder. If the temperatures are extremely high, for example, if it's extremely hot on site, this can create additional risk exposures, particularly if you're dealing with products that have got a low flash point. So we have to ensure that it's handled correctly with the correct staff and PPE. If the temperatures are high, if it is extremely cold, for example, that can also impact how we deal with an incident. In the same token, where it can be a blessing or a curse, depending on what we're dealing with. We had an incident involving a bitumen tanker not too long ago. The tanker had gone down, but it was freezing on site. Temperatures were below freezing, so the product just solidified, completely solidified. So it was really easy for the guys to just basically come in, use pitchforks and remove it. Versus if it's extremely hot on site, the product's going to spread, it becomes a lot more molten, and there's generally a paraffin base that will leach out and cause further contamination. The weather also impacts the different methodologies that we would utilize when wanting to treat on site. So with methodologies, there's a few main ones that you'll deal with. So it would be on-site ex situ remediation. So this is our go-to where feasible. You do also need to have space to treat the product. You need to have time. So it does take a couple of weeks to months, depending on the product and the contamination. And it has to be a product that is suitable for on-site remediation. So this would be where we remove the contaminated product, create stockpiles, apply the remediation agents to degrade the contamination. So we would have bioremediation product for hydrocarbons, acids, for example. You would use limes and fertilizers to neutralize pH levels. So those become underwriting factors when it comes to placing the risk. What is the potential cost of rehabilitation? So on-site rehabilitation is the most aligned to environmental legislation, where we are reducing carbon footprint and product to landfill, treat on site, put the same soil back into the existing excavation. That way we also reduce the potential costs of importing backfilling soil. You can't just take soil from anywhere and put it back into the excavation. So it needs to align to the background pH levels, grading of the soil. Certain areas, particularly on the national routes, they want confirmation of where the soil has come from. So you have to have certification where you've procured the soil. You have to have those background samplings to ensure that the pH levels and the type of soil gradient aligns to what is existing there prior to any backfilling. So you would have to have the cost of bringing the product in, as well as the more certification, the sort of higher level of compliance the soil needs to be, the higher the costs are going to be, which impacts your cost of claim. And then you're also basically introducing new potential microorganisms into an area where the existing ones would fit the background samples more comprehensively. So we treat on site as much as possible where we can. So in certain instances, you are not able to treat on site. That would be due to limitations in terms of product not being able to be treated on site, or we have a spacing issue or a timing issue where the roads authorities may say, we're not prepared to give you space or time to treat the soil. We want you to dig and dump, backfill. You've got X amount of days, which does impact the cost of claim. There are very limited HAZChem landfill facilities in South Africa. So it's the cost of transporting the contaminated soil to the landfill facility, where you'll pay different prices per ton, depending on the type of product and the level of contamination. The costs all vary, and that is totally up to the landfill's discretion as to how much they want it to be. And that also has an impact in terms of location. Because of the scarcity of the facilities, you would potentially be stuck between moving the product to another province. So the Western Cape, for example, charges on average 3 times higher for landfill disposal versus like Gauteng, which has got a lot more facilities. You can get a lot more affordable rates per ton on disposal. So we would potentially, when we have incidents in the Cape, it is more cost effective for us to transport the soil to the Eastern Cape and dispose of it at that landfill facility. The per ton rate is significantly lower, even factoring in the additional transport costs. So that also comes into that claims management side of it, where you would look at all of these different things holistically. So from there, if we cannot take the product to landfill, because landfills do not accept all commodities, certain products are prohibited from landfill, particularly class 6 products. So this is toxins, pesticides, herbicides, very limited in terms of landfill acceptance. So with these type of products, there is quite a strong move towards incineration. So there's only 2 incineration facilities in South Africa, and the cost is potentially up to 100 times more than a landfill disposal. So where you could potentially be looking at an average cost of, let's say, 750 Rand per ton, at landfill, you're looking at between 27 to 100 Rand per kg at incineration. So quite literally over 100% more expensive, 100 times more. So, and if the product can't be treated locally at the incineration facilities within South Africa, it can be exported to Europe for incineration at the larger facilities there. So that would have a huge cost implication in terms of exporting the waste, basal applications, and then disposal in euros. So we try and move away from that as much as possible where we can, but there is certain scenarios where your hands will be tied, and that is the only solution. that does get factored in on an underwriting level when risks come on. We then also have in situ remediation. So this would be when you don't excavate the contaminated soil. In the image, for example, on the embankment, there is impact onto the grass and the soil there, but because it's so close to the road surface, you have limitations in terms of excavation. So generally it's to a maximum depth of 30 centimeters that you'll be allowed to excavate. And this is just to protect the integrity of the infrastructure. So if you dig too deep that close to the road surface, you may cause collapse. The same with building infrastructures as well. So in those cases, we do not excavate further than what we're permitted. And then we dose the remediation agent directly into the contaminated soil in the ground. So it is effective. It just does take a little bit longer because we can't aerate and turn and water the soil as we would on an ex situ remediation process. And these are all variable. So every claim is going to be different, but you do have historical claims to reference on how we would actually treat them. So in terms of timelines, and this is also a point that gets quite a lot of confusion around it, is why does a claim take so long? This should be quick, this should be easy. Because of all these different factors and the different governments' involvements, national roads and property owners, sometimes you're going to have various different timeframes that we're dealing with. Certain incident claims can be cleaned up in one day. So if it's just a road surface impact, no major impacts into the environment, that could be a one-day claim and you're done. If you do have significant impact into the environment, it could take weeks, months, years, depending on what you're dealing with. So the processes can take very long, and we do have active claims that are in excess of 3 years that we currently deal with. So the operational side of the claim is concluded, but there's generally a monitoring requirement from the Department of Environmental Affairs for whatever term they deem suitable. So sometimes it's 2 to 3 years that they want assessments done to prove that there is no impact into the greater environment, and that does form part of your claim. And the cost of those are quite significant. So an average environmental impact assessment report could cost in the range of 50,000 Rand. So if you've been issued a directive to do biannual reporting for 3 years, you're looking at potentially an additional 300,000 Rand added to your claim, just for reporting purposes to obtain a sign-off. So NEMA, so it's the National Environmental Management Act. You'll hear us reference this quite a lot. So this is the overarching legislation that determines how we identify, respond, and treat environmental instances, as well as the fines and penalties that can be implemented in terms of contravention of this legislation. So this is one of the very, very active government departments, and they do take this job very seriously. And it's also pertinent to note that South Africa has some of the best environmental legislation in the world. So our legislation is very, very comprehensive and often adapted by other countries. So most African countries utilize our legislation in the absence of their own. And because it is so comprehensive, our legislation is generally all-encompassing for our own claims. However, if in the absence of a specification in terms of our legislation, we will generally reference the European standards in terms of South African legislation. So this is briefly the Section 30 process, and these are the steps that you would need to follow in the event of a release into the environment. So what is important to note here is that in the event of a release, the responsible party must inform the authorities. So what is not referenced here, and this becomes a little bit of a caveat to potential further issues or misunderstandings, is that it doesn't specify a type of product. The legislation doesn't say only toxic products or only these specific UN listed products become reportable. So it's absent in terms of that. So it is any product released that could cause harm to the environment, human health, or property can become reportable in terms of Section 30. So even if the client is operating non-hazardous products, so products without a UN number, they are still reportable in terms of this. So a UN classification is the United Nations numbering system. So this is just to circumvent basically language barriers for first responders. So as dangerous goods products move around the world, it obviously is traveling through different territorial limits where there's potentially language barriers. So in the 1960s, they did a classification of, there's a listing of over 3,500 products that have got specific UN numbers, so a 4-digit number code tied back to that product. So if you can envision a fuel tanker that you may have potentially seen, they all have the number UN1203 on the back of them. That is how it's identified throughout the world. So as an easy identification for brokers, if your client is storing or transporting any commodity that's got UN plus 4 digits, you know immediately that it's a dangerous good. And that is the trigger to, you have to have insurance, you have to have all the compliance in place. Clients operating outside of those UN numbers do still have the exposure, however, they do not have those compliance requirements. So cooking oils, certain fertilizers, water-based paints, milks, and a lot of food-grade products fall into the non-UN listed category, but they do still pose a risk to the environment and they are still reportable. There's also no specification in terms of the volume. So where clients are storing and transporting exempt quantities, they are purely exempt from the compliance requirements. They are not, however, exempt from the responsibilities and the reporting obligations. So further to that, so once there is now a spill, you have to take immediate steps to contain the spillage. So this is where it becomes a little bit tricky for the clients that do not have the correct spill response plans, don't have insurance, and do not have SLAs with the correct service providers. So spills do not keep office hours. Potentially you're looking at 2 o'clock in the morning, they've had a release, they now don't know what to do. They're going to call their broker and they're going to expect the broker to perform a miracle for them. And if you phone a spill response company and you don't have an SLA or an insurance policy in place, they are not going to respond until you've got money in the bank. So if you've had a large-scale tanker rollover, for example, they're going to want conservatively a minimum of 250,000 Rand reflecting in their bank account before they will even respond. So you've now got a time delay. Well, this is basically happening in the middle of the night. And whilst that delay is happening, your spill is getting worse. Your cost of the spill is getting worse as you go along. So it's really, really important that although clients may say they don't have the risk exposure, rather be prepared, have a plan in place so that you can initiate the swift response as quickly as possible to mitigate the full potential cost exposures. So once you've now done that immediate response, you've got 48 hours to submit an alarm notification. So this is generally in the form of an email to basically say, I'm from such a company, I've had a release at this location, this is the volume, and this is what I've done. It's quite basic. You're putting it through to municipal, provincial, some national authorities. They can choose to get involved or not and get involved. The obligation falls onto the responsible party to report. Following that, you've got 14 days to submit the detailed Section 13. So this is a template provided by the government, more comprehensive document where they want to know, how did this happen? What are the impacts? What is your remediation action plan? Have you done a root cause analysis? So it's a little bit more of a comprehensive document where they want more details so that they can either accept it as presented or comments, issue directives, etc. So you always want to be proactive. We find that the authorities are a lot more reciprocal when you are proactive with them versus them almost catching you out, saying, where's your document? Why haven't you done this? They're a lot harsher to deal with there. And when they do issue the directives, they're generally very stern and they're very cost heavy. And at that point, you now do not have the opportunity to negotiate with them or propose alternatives. The directive stands, which has then that cost implication. So once this is now done, you're continuing on site. You're going to remediate the site depending on one of those 4 different options, depending on what the spill is, the product is, and the location. Once you have successfully done that process, you will apply for site closure. So this is not always forthcoming, but it's really important to have your own independent lab analysis done. So this will be done by the environmental teams at an independent lab to certify that you've treated the impact into the environment, you've restored it to the condition it was prior to the incident, so that you've got for your own records proof to satisfy any parties that you have attended to it in the absence of a formal government sign-off. It also gives a level of protection in terms of limiting the liability exposures and also a leg to stand on if there is any future incidents. So if there's a future spill in that area, you are able to basically prove that it's not your contamination, you've dealt with it historically. Okay, so we're on to our first question. So fastest fingers first. So how many days do you have to submit your Section 30 alerts? So Clarissa Herman, she is the winner. So thank you very much. We will get your details and send you your vouchers. Congratulations, guys. So we will have another one throughout the presentation, but you'll see we've kept them quite light-hearted. Okay, so now on to the fun stuff. You've suffered through the boring part of it. Now we're on to the interesting side of it. So we're on to our claim scenarios. So scenario number 1, so this is a non-hazardous product, so no UN number, not a dangerous good in terms of classification. So the vehicle doesn't have to be dangerous goods compliant and the driver doesn't have to be compliant. So in this case here, it was an entire bulk tanker full of cooking oil. So this is not a hazardous product. It is an edible product. And we get the query, but it's natural. Why can't we just leave it? It does still pose an impact to the environment, particularly in these large volumes. It can cause quite significant impact almost straight away. And I like to basically reply on that. So asbestos and arsenic are also naturally occurring. You also don't want to just leave that lying around. So in this case here, bulk tankers are not compartmentalized. So generally, if these go, you're dealing with an entire tanker that's going to be lost. And the spill was approximately 13 kilometers long. It impacted onto road services, drain systems, water sources, private properties, commercial properties. It went everywhere. And what was significant was is that we had major rain downpour on the first night of the claim. And this spread the product into a wetland area, which poses a unique set of challenges in dealing with that. You have to have specific approval before you can do any changes into a wetland area. You can't excavate, you can't remove reeds. You have to have special approvals for that. So it makes it very complicated to deal with these types of claims and has got a direct cost implication. So your cost of claim here exceeded 2.2 million rands. And I just want to stress with that is just the cleanup and rehabilitation costs. That does not include any of the third-party liability costs. Those claims have not been made yet, but they will come. So this is a video of the tanker. So the last presentation, last time I shared this, someone said it sounds like oil frying, like someone's actually frying some resource or something. The oil is pouring out. So in this case here, it's a very good operation. There was no accident, there was no impact. And the tanker was driving along and they had started to have a minor spill, which got progressively worse as they continued driving. They eventually pulled over in the city centre of Ermelo, and at this point, the tanker was gushing. So if there is minor spills from a tanker, your driver or your first responders are often able to basically plug it, tighten a bolt, put a drip tray underneath. There is like various forms of sort of containment that can be done, and then you can transfer the product out. But at this rate, the product was really pouring out. There was nothing anyone could have done at this stage. So we did have the tanker investigated, so maybe there is a malfunction or maintenance issue because there was no direct cause. So in terms of our business model, we respond first always and ask questions later. We'd rather get out there on the critical time, as opposed to 24 hours where you can really change the scope and trajectory of your claim. We respond and handle the questions in the background. So we did have the vehicle inspected and there was no maintenance issues. The tanker itself is less than a year old. All the paperwork and maintenance records are perfect order. The tanker was inspected in terms of was there a structural defect or fault? Nothing. An absolute freak accident that happened. One of the bolts had started to come loose throughout the journey, and the sort of vibrations of the truck driving had caused it to become more loose as it went, and then eventually get to the point that there's so much product coming out that pressure causes a complete failure. So it was inspected. There was absolutely no wear and tear. So I said on the plate where the screws are, the bolts, if it was wear and tear, it created a pear-shaped wearing over time with the movement. There was absolutely no signs of wearing whatsoever. Just an absolute freak accident. And this is a client that's not a frequent claimer. They do maintain their vehicles. They take all those precautions, but this is why they have got insurance to cover these type of freak accidents that happen. So here's some of the visuals from first night. That was an absolutely massive cleanup job. And this is also to stress that the response by the correct and equipped responders. So if you had someone with a bakkie and a lappy, they were not going to get very far. We had massive teams on site. So we had 2 incident commanders who worked on site. I think it was the first 3 days, 24/7. We had 3 super suckers. So that's the picture in the bottom corner there. It's like a large industrial vacuum machine sucking up all the free phase product and the contaminated rainwater. So with that heavy rain downpour, this product migrated all over the show. So oil and water don't mix, so it just spread. It spread the levels of contamination everywhere. So on the first night, we also had a lot of the public driving through the oil spill. So you've got private vehicles slipping out. In the process of that, they're spreading your area of contamination. So we had teams of 50 general laborers on site because we've got multiple people dealing with various different things. You've got the impact onto the national road, impact on the main area, the free phase products, the wetland areas, water sources, map where the product is going to end up so that we can contain and work back simultaneously. We used hundreds of meters of booms. So in the top and the bottom image there, it almost looks like a long sausage. Those are aquaphobic, so they don't soak up the water, they just soak up the free phase hydrocarbons. So this is to stop the further spread of the contamination. And then we used, I think it was over 80 tons of absorbents, and this is now to soak up the oil so that we can clean the road surfaces. So it was a massive, massive operation. So here we're on to the next day. So you can see the major impacts onto the road surfaces. So we had to have the traffic inspectorate come in so that we could shut down the roads because the cars kept driving through it. It is a safety hazard as well as spreading your area of contamination. So we had to have approval to close down the entire city centre. So the whole of Envirosure was shut down while we attended to this. So we also have to bring in large resources so that we can handle it as quickly as possible. Bearing in mind, we have to get these roads open so that people can get out their homes and that the businesses can continue conducting. So this was on the 23rd of December. The malls were shut down. The shopping centres had to be shut down. Fuel stations, basically everything. There was no, they couldn't gain access. So you've got the teams clearing the road surfaces as quickly as possible. They are applying the absorbents to remove the free phase oil. They then apply degreasers and then HV clean. Sometimes this has to happen 2 or 3 times depending on how much contamination we're dealing with. So if you can now imagine the cost per kilometre, per square metre to clean the road surfaces, and you've got 13 kilometres on the freeway, and then you've got this massive area in the main city centre of town. And then everything that you take from the sites has to be disposed of. So all of the water and oil contamination that had to go to liquid waste facilities, and you pay per ton of disposal. And then all of this absorbents that we're utilizing, the booms, etc., all of that has to go to landfill facility for disposal. So we've got all of these teams working concurrently. We've got 2 incident commanders because of the sensitivity of this situation. And you've got the public up in arms. Everyone is stressed out. People want to trade. Businesses are absolutely freaking out. It's Christmas. You can't get into the game at the shopping centre, for example. They can't sell those big ticket items. You've got this entry issue. The McDonald's, they were absolutely freaking out. I've never spoken to someone that much with regards to a claim. So they were very stressed. On the first night, people drove through their drive-through, so threw the oil into the drive-through. So there was oil contamination throughout the whole McDonald's parking lot, the drive-through area. The next day, we now shut the roads down, so we've got an access issue. People were able to get into the McDonald's from another back road, but now the whole place is contaminated. So as gently as you can, you just advise them you need to lodge a claim in terms of your policies, business interruption, because you can't admit liability at this stage, but we can attend to your cleanup. So we're saying to them, we are very happy to clean your area, we'll get the team in, where they're saying, well, you need to clean it, but we're also not prepared to shut the site down. So they eventually agreed to give us 1 hour between midnight and 1 a.m. to clean the entire area. They were going to reboot their system, and they would give us that 1 hour to attend to the cleanup. So a minor job that may have taken us, a very small team, a couple of hours, more cost effective, we now have got 1 hour to clean something that would have taken us a day. So your staff now working at 1 o'clock in the morning, it has got a direct impact on your cost of claim, but to placate and manage the community, you have to, as much as possible, act in their best interest to get the area up and running again. So there's a visual of how much contamination we're dealing with. So it started as a trickle and basically worked its way up to something significantly more. Plus we've had vehicles driving through it, so they've spread that contamination area. You can't just leave this cooking oil on the freeway. So besides the potential exposures to third parties, when it rains, it creates a major slip hazard. And over time, this causes an impact to the tarred surface itself. It degrades the effectiveness of the tar, so it can actually damage the road surface over time if not handled correctly. So an additional uniqueness about this claim is we obviously now have this major spread. We're clearing the roads as quickly as possible, trying to mitigate the major exposures, but the product keeps popping out the drain systems and we can't map it. The municipality doesn't have a map that they can provide us so that we can have a clear plan of what we're dealing with. So we eventually sent our assessor to go to the municipality. So Raakte Afrikaans oom to go find another oom to help us here. So the municipality says they've got no map. They don't have one of the drain system, but they managed to pull a really, really old oom out the archives that was there in the 70s when they redid this drain system. So they do a walkabout so he can actually show him this is how the drain system works. There was a lot of unexpected loops or sort of just aspects that you wouldn't anticipate, hence why the product kept coming out in different areas. But they did also highlight that the drains hadn't been cleared in over 20 years. So you've now got 20 years worth of contamination, debris sitting in these drain systems. So sometimes that's a plus for us because it stops the spread of the product. So we can just use the super sucker, remove it, and we're good. But here there was clearly gaps in the debris and the product was still moving through it somehow. So we couldn't just leave it. So there was talks of us having to jet and lance the entire drain system in this town, which would have increased our cost of claim exponentially because whatever we take out that drain becomes our contamination. So we really did not want to have to do that. So we eventually had a consensus and agreement from everyone that we would flush the system. So we would apply a remediation agent and use water to flush it so that we can basically push any of the hydrocarbon contamination out, take it out at the end. And then monitor on site. We were very successful in that flushing process. And then we did some longer term monitoring to ensure that we got all of the product and that there was no major long term. These are just some images from the sites, so you can see the impacts to the water sources, how the gentlemen are having to clean the road surfaces, the PPE that's required, and the teams that we had to have on site, the sheer manpower that this job required. And in cases like this, you have to basically throw your resources at the first couple of days, get massive teams there, do as much as you can, and then you scale back. There's no point being sort of penny pinching when it comes to claims like this. It costs you more in the long term. So you want the big response and then you scale back. So just pertinent to note, the bottom image is there. And this becomes an issue of contention when we have claims. So we've got our booms and the absorbents and the water sources to ensure that we catch any sort of contamination that may flow through. But you'll see there's a lot of rubbish in there. So whatever comes out that drain system becomes now your contamination because your product contaminated the rubbish. So that forms part of our cleanup scope, part of our disposal, and it does add to your cost of claim, and it can become a very sensitive point for the people involved. But we would have to clean it and put it back. So to clean the rubbish and put it back is going to cost us things that we're disposing of it. So it is greater for the environment in the long term, but it is also something to factor in when looking at indemnity limits. Where are these potential claims going to happen, and are you going to have to deal with additional existing pollution like this? Okay, so we're going to go on to the next claim. So there is a trigger warning with this. It is a very sensitive topic that we're going to be talking about. So if you are sensitive, just leave for 5 minutes and then join in again. So there are no sensitive images. We've ensured that we haven't used any of those, but it is a very sensitive topic. Okay, so we have got the infamous Boksburg explosion. So we all know about it. We've got that BBC image there because this made international headlines. It was an absolute tragedy, and just to highlight before we go in, we only hear about tragedies. We never hear about the save the day situations where the service providers and the insurance industry, in greater sense, assist with preventing these type of incidents happening, and also managing them when they do happen so that we don't end up at this stage ever again. So this happened on the 24th of December. So you'll see that Envirosure has a really tragic or large claim close to Christmas every year, every single year. So this is probably the worst in terms of death toll and just damages to property. So with this claim here, we had multiple lives lost and quite significant damages, like billions worth of damages to property and infrastructure. So here is another video. So it's not going to be too long, this one. Okay. So in this instance here, there was an LPG gas tanker and they became wedged underneath the bridge. So with this video here, you can see that the truck is still on, it's wedged underneath there, but the public are all involved here. So if you take away anything from this presentation, if you see a stuck gas tanker or any dangerous goods tanker, just drive away. Don't stay, don't film it. The spark exposure from phones, any electronics could cause an explosion. It's not worth risking your life for the sensationalism of it. So in this case here, it's an outsourced driver and he made a wrong turn. So he had made a wrong turn on his route and he was trying to get back onto his route that he had deviated from. And with this here, I mean, he took the wrong turn. I've driven up one ways before taking a wrong turn. So I've been very fortunate that it hasn't cost anyone their life, but something as simple as taking a wrong turn can. So just to maybe give this driver a little bit of grace, it was a mistake. So with this here, 6:35, you get stuck underneath this bridge. So there was a lot of speculation about the heights, sort of markings, etc. So you can see in these images here, the truck and the tanker actually would have cleared the bridge. There's a slight elevation at the rear. We'll see that in the other images, which caused the back of the tanker to lift and basically become wedged. So he had contacted the company, he had contacted the police, the fire department to advise them that he's stuck, that he can smell that there's been a rupture, the gas is leaking, and he tried to caution the public away as much as possible. So there's a lot of footage of the driver saying, please leave the site, please get away, it's not safe. So in an ideal world, there is different ways to deal with gas tankers. So you can do a gas transfer from one tanker to another. You can also do a controlled flare. So that is where you would have experts come in and basically burn the gas off in a controlled manner to prevent any explosions. So if this wasn't under a bridge, as well, it also could have had a different impact because you've got now the product not dissipating into the environment as it naturally would. It is basically building a vapor cloud underneath the bridge because it can't expand as quickly as if it was in the open. So very fortunately, this driver had succumbed to gas inhalation and had been removed from the site. So he wasn't there. I think if he hadn't, he would have surely died because he was right by the tanker trying to get the public away from it. So because of the pressure build up from this gas tanker, because this is now pressurized gas inside this, and there is the rupture, the product's trying to release, it's being trapped. There is a boiling liquid vapor expansion explosion, LEV, that occurred. So this is now the point that that pressure's built up and you have an explosion. So 705 was the first explosion. There was 4 explosions in total, with the 4th one being the most significant. So these are some of the images from after the fact. So you can see in the larger picture the elevation of this little bridge. So this is what caused the back of the tanker to lift and become stuck. So if it was flat, I think this tanker would have cleared the bridge. So it was a very, very significant explosion. You can see the manhole covers off there because of how severe this explosion was. The sort of image of a vehicle there, that is the fire department's vehicle. So they had arrived after the first explosion, attempted to assist, but at this point, the subsequent explosions were worse. The 4th and final explosion was the explosion that caused the major damage and impacts. In the image in the middle there at the bottom, that's basically what's left of the tanker. So there's really just a chassis left behind there, and you can see the impact onto that railway bridge. So, I mean, these bridges are very sturdy, very strong. So it gives a really good indication of how severe this explosion was. So there was impacts onto property within a sort of 400-meter direct radius, which was quite significant, and tremors from this explosion were felt up to 4 kilometers away. This is the back of the tanker. So that's the image that's in the children's park there. That was the gas tanker, the rear of it. So with that 4th major explosion, because now if you can almost just picture with every more minor explosion, you're building up more pressure in this tank underneath this bridge, and it is at a certain point the pressure has to release. So with this here, the final release was the back of that tanker exploding off. So this was found a few 100 meters away in a park. So the velocity of that explosion was significant, very, very significant. And there's an image from the top, basically showing how this bridge had collapsed. So this is when our team got to site. So we were only advised after all of the explosions had happened. So we did send our teams out immediately to assist. So at this point, the damage was done. Quite significantly done, but our teams were able to assist the other emergency response with incident management, also the hazmat side of it. Because they are hazmat responders, we were able to go into the hot zone and assist with ensuring that it was safe for the other responders to come through. So we've got gas meters that we were able to basically have the teams go through and make sure that it was safe for the other responders to go in, deal with the evacuation, crowd management, and then eventually we assisted with very minor cleanup in the major impact area, just in terms of the fuel and hydraulic oils from the vehicle itself, and a little bit of the debris, which we standard general instances we wouldn't cover debris removal, but in this instance here we elected to assist with that, just to basically assist the response teams and the greater teams on whole. So here's an image. I think this was after the first explosion, but you can still see that the public is quite chilled. They're just walking around, very nonchalant around it. And this is like, you know, what an episode of Dumb Ways to Die. Stay away from an explosion. A lot of lives could have been saved if there was correct evacuation done, and just steering clear of the situation. And another contributing factor was that the nearest hospital was right here. So we'll see it when we look at the aerial footage. There was a government hospital, the Tambo Memorial, that was right there adjacent to the bridge, but that was severely impacted by the explosion. So that had caused major structural damages, including a portion of the roof collapsing. So the entire hospital had to be evacuated. So your first basic response could now not be the first medical response. The impacted people had to be moved to other hospitals. So that entire hospital was evacuated in 3 hours, which is quite significant for a government facility. But it was good to note here that this is where South Africans really rallied together, and there was government, private, volunteers, you name it. Everyone was working together to basically manage and mitigate this incident. So they had private air ambulances come in, private ambulances, public gift of the givers was on site almost immediately. That also gives you an indication of the magnitude of the impact into this community. So when we went through our group, so every claim we've got a WhatsApp group with the images, and this was the worst, the absolute worst WhatsApp group. So my hat goes off to those first responders. Some of you may have seen the images that were circulating on social media, but it was horrific. So people running around with their skin burnt off, body parts, very, very horrifying stuff to see, but it's a tragic reality. So when we went through the images, we'd seen this one, and you've now had this major explosion in your community, and that's someone's kids standing on a structurally unsafe bridge that has just exploded. So it was just almost like a little reminder to safeguard that. And when these incidents happen, stay clear. Don't get sucked in to the sensationalism of it. So here is the aerial footage, so you can see the impacted area and the community. So that there gives a good aerial image. So with that, the statutes expire on the 24th of December this year, and to date, no one has been held criminally or civilly liable for that entire incident. So to move on to our next and final claim, which we'll finish off on because we've got a prize after this one. So when we get to that, then we'll basically be done. So this is another claim scenario where there was a unique impact on this. So once again, non-hazardous product. So no UN number, driver did not have to be HAZCAM compliant nor the vehicle. So non-UN doesn't mean that there's no impact into the environment. This was a single vehicle accident. No one else was involved. The driver had a medical emergency, had a heart attack, and the truck went down a ravine. So as much as this is a well-run operation, there are circumstances where the drivers can have medical emergencies en route. So a significant factor to this was that it was on the N3, so a national road where most claims happen. And that becomes an additional involvement because they obviously want to clear that road surface as quickly as possible so that you don't have the impact to potential other road users, as well as those time delays. So you've got a major time crunch to basically get the roads cleared as quickly and effectively as you can. So we had water sources impacted, private property impacted, and the various stakeholders. So the uniqueness around this claim was that the property that was impacted, the farm, was in the process of being sold. So basically like an escrow process as such. And the finance house on the purchasing side had done a cross-check of the contaminated land registries. The government holds this registry of all historic or active environmental impacts, and it's for record-keeping purposes as such. But what we've seen recently is that the finance houses are cross-checking it so that they can make sure that they do not by default purchase a contaminated property. You have to fully disclose any contamination, any known contamination. So it has become a little bit of a contentious issue recent. So here's the footage where you can see that the truck's gone down the embankments, significant impact, and it was IBCs inside the containers that were all basically ruptured. It's gone into the water sources. So this was down a ravine, underneath a bridge, into a little stream that flowed into a slightly bigger river that flowed onto pools on the farmer's property, which were used for irrigation and cattle watering purposes. So initially you can see that the product is like a murky white. It did, however, have a very, very strong butyl smell to it, so an extremely strong odor, but it was non-hazardous as such. but almost instantaneously there was a reaction. So this also is something to factor in, that although products can be tested in a lab to see their reactivity or their toxicity, when you're in an uncontrolled environment, this can cause adverse reactions to the product, how it's going to respond. So you can see here it's turned this yellow color and it's solidified, and almost instantaneously you've got impacts onto the water as well as the plants. So the plants starting to die off. So you can see in the larger image there, they've already gone brown. So they've been impacted straight away. Fish were dying. So we were lucky in this case that the authorities were quite chilled about the fish because they were alien. So they were not fazed whatsoever that these fish were dying. They were quite happy about it. But if this had been someone's private property, and let's say a trout farm, for example, you're going to have a cost implication per fish. It's got a value to it. So in this case here, you can't really get too involved in changing the flow path of a river. There's also specifications to that. So we would, in an ideal world, basically just flush the product down, catch it. In the image with the gentleman standing there with the life vest on, that's a perma boom that you inflate so that we can contain any of the product. We then use absorbents to scoop it up and dispose on site. So it's generally not too cost effective. I mean, too costly, but it takes time. But in this case here, we didn't have the luxury of time because we had all of these property owners and selling parties freaking out because they wanted this cleaned up so that they could get the deal to go through. So this product here, we're now scooping as much as we can. Although non-hazardous, this product was spontaneously combusting on sites where we were storing the waste. So that's another aspect to basically get the waste off site, to make sure that we don't have a secondary fire or damages from that. You've got your staff that have to have the full PPE on every day. In this case here, we were lucky that the water aided us. So we had set up these catchment areas and we had heavy, heavy downpours of rain. So this product is soluble. It will move and flush the product down, dilution ratios to an acceptable level. And with those heavy downpours down this flow path, we were able to catch and contain, remove the product as much as possible. Same process of applying a remediation agent down the flow path to remove any residual contamination. And then deal with any sort of soil contamination. So here we had the outgoing farmer saying, just take out all the dead grass out of it. Like, I don't care, just remove it so that we can sell this property. Where we'd come back to him to say, if we do that, you're going to have significantly higher chances of erosion happening over time, particularly on these dam areas. So we were very fortunate with this, that they allowed us this process. Within a month, that grass was already growing green again. Within a month following claim, we were able to basically say that the water is at a level that's acceptable. They could put the cattle back in there to start grazing and watering again from this area. But this is an example of an external factor that influenced our process and time and the cost of the claim, because we had to deal with this a lot faster. So I think this takes us to the end. So we've got our final question here. So fastest fingers first. On which national road did this claim occur on? Okay, so Enrica Meyer is the winner. Congratulations. Okay, so that's going to take us to the end. If we've got any questions. Okay, so Jade said she's answered the one question that's come through. Is there any other questions before we close off?
Any questions from what I can see?
Okay, perfect. We will just pop our details. Okay, I can see someone's got their hand up. Maria. And you'll have to just unmute yourself if you have a question, Maria. Okay, no, that's fine. Then we'll leave it at that. We have left our details in the chat, so please feel free to pop us any questions or queries that you have, and then you'll receive your CPD certificates within about a week or so. And if you are short on CPD hours, feel free to go take a look at our website. We have just launched our 12th module. So there is a lot of content on there if you would like to boost your CPD hours. But thank you very much to the FIA for hosting us today.
Adele, thank you so much for your time and the environment effort in this. Thank you very much. And I'm going to hand over back to my colleague at the FIA.
Thank you so much, Clint. Thank you to the FI members for your time today, and to Envirosure as well, to the host of this presentation. Thank you so much for that very insightful share today. That's all from our side.
Awesome. Have a great day, guys.
Yes, have a great day and week, remainder of the week. Thank you.